Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the improvement era from March 1932. And this article is entitled Greatness in Men, Superintendent George Albert Smith, by Bryant S. Hinckley, President of Liberty Stake. So, I do happen to know a little bit about George Albert Smith. I don't know his entire story, but I know a little bit. So I'd be interested to see how this one plays out. I know he's the son of John Henry Smith, who was the son of George A. Smith. So he was named after his grandfather, who was the first cousin of Joseph Smith. So this person was the third cousin of Joseph Fielding Smith. People always think it's the same line. It's not. He was descended down through John Smith, who was the brother of Joseph Smith Sr. Yeah? So, yeah, they were cousins, but they were not direct lines. Yeah. So they're another Smith, but they're not like the same one. Anyways. There's a little quote at the top that says, "Few men in the Intermountain West can count as many warm friends as Elder George Albert Smith. President Hinckley in this article tells why." I guess it's a little teaser to try to get you to read it, but I'm already reading it, okay? Alright, so it starts out with a portrait of him, and this is what he looks like. He does not look a great deal like his father or grandfather. I really don't think he does. I'll put up a couple pictures of them. It makes me think he must look more like his mother. I don't have a picture of his mother, but yeah, that's just my guess. Also, he had some problems with his eyes, so if you look at them, one eye is larger than the other. I think that if he lived today, he would have had surgery a couple of times probably to correct some issues with his eyes, but since that wasn't an option at the time, he wore thick Coke bottle glasses, which are not very obvious in this picture, but they were very, very thick. Anyways, very poor eyesight. Doesn't matter, but just thought I'd throw that tidbit in since I happen to know it. So let's go ahead and read. George Albert Smith is an outstanding American citizen. He loves the land that gave him birth and the flag that waves over it. His sires have followed the Stars and Stripes in battle and maintained the Constitution in the vicissitudes of peace. Patriotism is born and bred in him. His gifted and illustrious father, John Henry Smith, had a patriotic pride and a passionate love for this land of liberty and for the republic which our fathers established here. It's a little interesting that they're going this patriotic route. I feel like it's slightly irrelevant, but hey, it's also written in March. Like if this were published in July, I would understand it more, but okay. I hope they don't harp on this too much because it's a bit irritating. All right. George Albert is a descendant of Edward Winslow of the Mayflower, who later became governor of the Plymouth colony. I did not know that, but it is interesting. Among his ancestors are also the original families of Libby, Freeman, Hovey, and Lord, all of New England. Okay, yeah, they're all from New England, yeah. Some of his revolutionary ancestors are Samuel Smith, chairman of the Committee of Safety of Topsfield, Massachusetts; Asahel Smith, son of Samuel Smith, who was also of Topsfield, Massachusetts; Jonathan Farr, Timothy Chase, aide to General Washington; and Richard Lyman, orderly sergeant to General Putnam. All of these are also ancestors of Joseph Smith, because they were from the same family. I just think it's interesting that they are like, hey, this is his ancestry. It's like, well, yeah, but like I don't know, it seems a little strange. Like, he's definitely not the only one. This is not unique to him. All of the Smiths were related to these people. I don't know, I think it's a little strange to go this route, because he's one of many Smiths. I don't know, I think it's a little strange. Thus, it is seen that not only his immediate ancestors, but his forebears for generations have been liberty-loving Americans, fostering in every way true patriotism and carrying forward the purposes expressed in the preamble of the Constitution of our common country. He has a proud inheritance and is worthy of it. Okay, can we move on now? John Henry Smith, who was a counselor in the first presidency of the church at the time of his death. Yeah, I have an article on him, I'm pretty sure anyway. Will always be remembered as one of the most impressive and eloquent defenders of the faith, and as a leader of vision and courage. There was something genial and chivalrous about him. His presence added dignity and prestige to any cause or company. Our modern reclamation services owes a lasting debt of gratitude to him and to his loyal son, George Albert. The cooperation and support which those men brought to this cause is, in a large degree, responsible for its success. Okay. Let's take a quick look at the pictures. There's one at the top. This is John Henry and Sarah Farr Smith at the time of their marriage. Yeah, he resembled his mother. He doesn't really look like his father. I'm just saying. Center, George Albert Smith and Lucy Woodruff, just before they were married. And the lower, a very young George Albert Smith. Yeah, very young is putting it mildly. He was, 3? And he was cross-eyed. Like, he had issues with his eyes, yeah? He had difficulty seeing. Like I said, if he lived today, I suspect he would have had surgery to correct it, but yeah. So a little bit strabismus, yeah? I think that's the right word. Anyway. The records show that George Albert took this work up where his father laid it down and gave it his loyal support. He was elected Vice President of the International Irrigation Congress, held at Calgary, Canada in 1913. Wow, you kind of jumped to the future, didn't you? I thought you were going to talk about his upbringing, and now we're like, and adulthood. Re-elected Vice President at Sacramento, California in 1914, and elected President of this Congress at El Paso, Texas in 1915. In 1917, he was elected President of the International Dry Farm Congress at the session held at Peoria, Illinois, and elected President of the Combined Irrigation and Farm Congress at Kansas City in 1918. This is indeed a splendid record of service. Well, if you like farming, sure. All right. In 1898, he was appointed receiver of public monies and dispersing agent for Utah by President McKinley, and later reappointed by President Roosevelt. He was the first Latter-day Saint to receive a federal appointment. During the World War, he was a member of the State Council of Defense and was chairman of the Armenian and Syrian Relief. Well, that's kind of cool. His love of country is shown in the very active part which he has taken in the Society of the Sons of the American Revolution. He has served as chaplain of the Utah Society and was elected president of this branch in 1918 and re-elected the following year, and has served repeatedly as a member of the Board of Managers. He was a delegate to the National Congress of the Society when it met in New York City, also at the meetings held in New Jersey, in Rochester, and in Detroit, and has twice been elected vice president of the national organization. On February 22nd last, he delivered an address at a joint Lincoln and Washington memorial service held in Springfield, Illinois, a very distinct honor. He has sought always, and in the most enlightened and practical way, to further the interests of his country and to promote its general welfare as only a true-hearted American can do. Thus he has added luster to a name already bright with deeds of patriotic service. All down the line, this family has not only saluted the flag, but has followed it in battle and backed their Americanism with stern and valorous deeds. They have been peace-loving but militant for righteousness. It is a matter of interest to know that as a young man, he was active in the National Guard of Utah, serving as First Sergeant, Troop C, 1st Cavalry for the first full term of enlistment. He rides a horse with grace and skill. It's not a surprise, considering when he lived. His interpretation of religion is a true index to his character. His religion is not doctrine in cold storage. It is not theory. It means more to him than a beautiful plan to be admired. It is more than a philosophy of life. To one of his practical turn of mind, religion is the spirit in which a man lives, in which he does things, if it be only to say a kind word or give a cup of cold water. His religion must find expression in deeds. It must carry over into the details of daily life. It must manifest itself in the stern and rugged virtues which underlie all sound living. It compels him to make his practices square with his professions. This is equally true of Americanism. George Albert Smith is a man of action, not diction. He is never satisfied with just rendering passive service. All his endeavors are constructive. He is a natural crusader for righteousness and justice. He is officially connected with some of the leading commercial and industrial enterprises of Utah. At present, he is director and vice president of Utah Savings and Trust Company, like everybody else, director and vice president of Utah-Idaho Sugar Company, president of Libby Investment Company, director of ZCMI, director of Heber J. Grant and Company, and a director of Mutual Creamery Company. He was formerly a director of Utah National Bank and the Salt Lake Theater and of Decker Wholesale Jewelry Company. His judgment, his vision, and his unquestioned integrity, coupled with a capacity for bringing things to pass, would, we think, have made for him a place in the business and financial world if he had devoted his time and talents in that direction. Well, that's kind of a bold statement. Like, how do you know that? All right. Let's look at some more pictures. Here's a picture of him shaking hands with this person, and it says Father Victor Herring and George Albert Smith. I don't know what the occasion was. Interesting. And then there's this picture of what looks like, I don't know, is it a house? Above, cabin in the glen at the home of George Albert Smith. Here he spends his summer evenings. Okay, it looks more like a shed. It's kind of small. Yeah. All right, George Albert Smith Sr. and Jr. hanging out with his dad, yeah? I think he was taller than his dad, but I'm not 100% sure. So I think that he was the one in the back with his hat. And his father was the one in front. I could be wrong, though. So if I am mistaken, correct me. I feel like this picture is too grainy to tell for sure. One little tidbit I do happen to know is I'm pretty sure that he was the first president of the church who was not a polygamist. So if that is important to you, there you go. But at this time, in 1932, he was not president of the church yet. It was still Heber J. Grant. So, as a boy, he very early learned the meaning of hard work and felt the weight of responsibility. At the age of 13, he was employed in the ZCMI overalls factory. Well, that sounds like a great job for a 13-year-old. Oh, gosh. And afterwards in other departments and positions of that institution. Some of the positions were very humble. Well, duh. At 13, you're not going to get a great job. He subsequently became a director and had the honor of representing the institution at a gathering of prominent merchants in the city of London, who were entertained for 6 weeks by the British Drapers Association. Okay. It is a long call from the dust and noise of the factory to the position as the official representative at a great international gathering in the metropolis of the world. True, what the flip was he doing in London? He wasn't from London. He was born in Utah. In 1919, he was appointed by Governor Simon Bamberger to represent Utah at the International Housing Convention in London. He attended the public schools of Salt Lake City, the Brigham Young University of Provo, and the University of Utah. He is a keen observer, has traveled extensively, and mingled with men of liberal learning, and has thus acquired a culture and a training which colleges do not give. I'm sorry. I'm fairly certain that he did not finish his degree. And it was mostly because of his eyesight. His eyesight was so bad it was very difficult to read. So he struggled in school because of that. I'm pretty sure he failed out. Like saying he attended those colleges, like why do you even mention it when he went like 1 year and then failed? Like, I'm not 100% sure about that. I'll double check my facts at the end, but I'm fairly certain he flunked out of college because he had such difficulties reading that he couldn't keep up. I mean, yeah. It's interesting that they mention that and make it sound like all cool and like, oh, look at this, and he attended these 2 amazing schools. Well, sure, but he didn't finish. Yeah? I don't know. I'm just saying. On leaving the University of Utah, he became a member of the surveying party, which laid out the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad east from Green River. It was while working in this capacity that his eyesight became permanently impaired as a result of the heat and glaring sun of that desert country. This was an irreparable loss to him, and had it not been for his indomitable will, it might have proved a serious handicap. Notwithstanding this, he is a well-read man. But he's not, though, because he can barely read. Why do you say that? Providentially, this very handicap had forced him to work in a field of greater importance. Oh, yeah? He is never idle from his pastime is saving and helping people. Okay, I would believe that. However, I'm sorry. This is one of those things where people like to pick on a disability from somebody and say, oh, it's such a good thing that they have this because it made them a better person. It's the inspiration porn idea. Like, dude, why don't you just say he was disabled and that made his life more difficult, you know? Like, you can say that. It did, you know? There are, to his credit, many achievements, but perhaps the field of his finest endeavor has been the Young Men's Mutual Improvement Association, of which organization he has been General Superintendent for 10 years. That's why they called him Superintendent, yeah. He has served this organization in almost every capacity, from a lay member to General Superintendent. He was stake superintendent at the time he was ordained an apostle. The Salt Lake stake, over which he then presided, was made up of about 40 wards. Geez, that's huge. And covered Salt Lake County. With his characteristic zeal, he gathered about him a corps of the most capable young leaders, organized his work, developed his plans, and carried forward his program with remarkable efficiency. Permeating the entire movement was a spiritual vitality which comes only from superior leadership. Sure, the deeds which will last longest and shine the brightest in the affections of those who know him best will not be his public utterances, his patriotic service, his business ability, nor the stimulating power which he imparts to all the movements and organizations with which he becomes connected, for we would not minimize any of these, for they are important, but the deeds which will forever adorn his life have been done in quiet ways. His supreme work has been accomplished in unseen places and at unknown hours, and often with forgotten and neglected people. He has been indeed a father to the fatherless and a friend to the forsaken. His solitude for the welfare of the young people has found expression in an individual missionary work of the most far-reaching and effective character. His unfailing kindness, his implicit faith in humanity, his rare ability to reach the hearts of boys, to win their confidence, to awaken the good that slumbers in their souls, has enabled him to do some of the most precious work that men ever do. He has the priceless gift of planting hope in the human heart, of restoring confidence, and starting men anew on the path that leads to peace and self-victory. Alright, let's look at the pictures real quick. Here's a big one. It's nice and cut out of him standing. George Albert Smith, the Trailblazer. Sure. And then there's a picture of 5 people here. He is the one on the bottom right. George Albert Smith and friends, who received the Silver Beaver for distinguished contributions to scouting. I've heard that that's quite a prestigious award, so congratulations to them. I don't know what you have to do to get it, though. And I don't know who the other people are. Although I do recognize a face or two, I'm not 100% sure who they are, and I don't want to say the wrong name, so I'm not going to say anything. Yeah. I could be wrong. I'm not very good at faces, I'm not going to lie. Okay, to get a faint glimpse of some of the best things he has done, one needs only to talk with a strong man whose locks are now touched with gray, and whose tender heart throbs with gratitude when he tells you what he did for him. This man had become a victim of drink. What are we talking about? And was in the depths of degradation and despair when George Albert Smith found him and put hope and resolution in his heart, and started him anew on the road to permanent happiness and splendid achievement. This gray-haired man has been signally successful with thousands of boys and girls, and out of his own bitter experience has been able to better understand the struggles and soul tragedies of others. Continued on page 295. I'm not sure why they're talking about this drunk guy. That's a little strange, I'm not gonna lie. Let's see if I can click down to 295. 24, 25, okay. Continued from page 272. And learned how to extend the helping hand and say the saving word to those who most need it. This rare and priceless lesson he learned from George Albert Smith. When you read between the lines and search the recesses of George Albert's life, this conviction settles upon your soul. The deep, quiet currents which run through his life are the forces which have made possible his most supreme work. These silent forces live on and may come to the surface only once in a while, but after all they are the forces that save society, bless mankind, and make this earth a good place in which to live. He is not physically rugged, but he is a dynamo that generates these salient and significant forces. This is the great thing in his life, and the thing for which men and women will rise up and call his name blessed. I say unto you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner that repenteth. Luke 15:10. If you were to visit George Albert Smith in his modest but beautiful and attractive home on Yale Avenue in Salt Lake City, you might be shown among other relics some splinters which fell upon his bed while he was lying upon the floor of a log cabin in Alabama. What? Why would he keep that? The house in which he and his missionary companions were staying was surrounded by a mob and fired upon. Their lives were saved by lying flat on the floor. These splinters were torn from the logs over his head by the hissing bullets. Jeez. Can you imagine? Like being shot at while you were just on your flippin' mission? To those who have come within the radius of his friendly influence, it is difficult to understand how anyone, friend or foe, could look upon him as an enemy, or to understand the motive that would prompt men to assail his life. He is a man of peace, and all his life has cultivated goodwill toward men. Here is a creed written by his own pen upon paper and long since recorded in the daily deeds of his busy life. You can put this creed in the past tense, and it epitomizes his life. That is what he has actually done. The great truths which he then aspired to teach, and the things he wanted to preach are beautifully exemplified by his own life. Okay. Bryant Hinckley, no offense, but you need some lessons in writing. You just used the word life about 5 times in the same paragraph. I am sure you could have used a different word. Read this creed and compare it with the records of his deeds. All right, here we go. I would be a friend to the friendless and find joy in ministering to the needs of the poor. I would visit the sick and afflicted and inspire in them a desire for faith to be healed. I would teach the truth to the understanding and blessing of all mankind. I would seek out the erring one and try to win him back to a righteous and a happy life. I would not seek to force people to live up to my ideals, but rather love them into doing the things that is right. I would live with the masses and help to solve their problems that their earth life may be happy. I would avoid the publicity of high positions and discourage the flattery of the thoughtless friends. I would not knowingly wound the feeling of any, not even one who may have wronged me, but would seek to do him good and make him my friend. I would overcome the tendency to selfishness and jealousy and rejoice in the success of all the children of my Heavenly Father. I would not be an enemy to any living soul, knowing that the Redeemer of mankind has offered to the world the only plan that will fully develop us and make us really happy here and hereafter. I feel it not only a duty but a blessed privilege to disseminate this truth. Well, that are very lovely words. I like it. Here's another picture. Just him on a horse, I guess. It says in Salt Creek Canyon. I don't know my way around that region of the world, but I'm sure it's not far from Salt Lake City. All right. An analysis of his character reveals another secret of his growth. He is a man of refined sensibilities, modest and unobtrusive, but possessing a lofty self-respect which has led him to constantly make the acquaintance and to diligently cultivate the companionship of men of the highest ideals. His supreme ideal was his father, for whom he had almost a religious devotion. Okay, that could be good or bad, depending on how far he takes it. It would be difficult to estimate what it means to a young man to contact great personalities. The touch with men of leadership and spiritual power, the association with triumphant and victorious souls, is the greatest inspiration to growth and fine endeavor. This is the contact we all need most. He has mingled with the greatest and the best men of all parties and creeds and made friends for himself and his cause. He has known personally 6 presidents of the United States. Okay. No, he didn't. He met them once. Yeah, there's a big difference. Many United States senators, congressmen, and governors are counted among his personal friends. Oh, I'm sure. In his 22nd year, he married Lucy Emily Woodruff, a granddaughter of the late President Wilford Woodruff, a woman of sublime faith and superior intelligence, possessing the matchless but indefinable gift of making a home a shrine. The natural beauty of the location, with the shrubs and flowers surrounding it, makes this one of the most delightful and picturesque places in the entire city. Okay, so she likes to garden, is what you're saying. Like, why don't you just say that? She likes to garden. More than 4,000 tulips bloomed in this garden last season, and one afternoon they cut and sent to the hospitals in the city 2,700 Shasta daisies. Oh my gosh, they must have quite a large property. There is an atmosphere of comfort and tranquility about this fireside which can emanate only from warm and hospitable hearts. Distinguished visitors from Europe and America have been entertained here and have never forgotten it. This is a real home, typical of the finest and most fundamental institutions that men and women ever create. Lucy Smith has gone with her husband, cared for him in his sickness, and sustained him in his endeavors as only a noble and devoted wife could do. They have been blessed with 2 daughters, Emily, wife of Robert Murray Stewart, and Edith, wife of George O. Eliot, and a son. His only son, George Albert Jr., is the sixth in his father's line to accept as divine the mission of the prophet Joseph Smith. Yeah, that's true. A companionship existing between his father and son is both an inspiration and a delight. These children have a proud ancestry and are altogether worthy of it. He is a technician in the fine art of making friends. Blessed are they who have the gift of making friends, for it is one of God's best gifts. It involves many things, but above all, the power of going out of one's own self and appreciating what is noble in others. Thomas Hughes. George Albert Smith's friendship is real. It is the expression of a sincere and refined soul. Someone has said that no man is useless while he has a friend. If a man's usefulness is measured by the number of his friends, who could estimate the value of his life? He meets the daily problems, small or great, with a brave heart and with manly courage, always carrying with him the warm hand clasp of a friendly note in his voice. One of the attractive sides of his characters of his thoughtful and generous acts of kindness to the unfortunate and the poor. He has a smile and a cheerful word of encouragement and a warmth of feeling that wins for him the hearts of men. He is sympathetic counselor, a delightful companion, a loyal and loving comrade. Wherever he goes, he spreads his genial rays of kindness. This is the secret of many of the finest achievements. The high and dominant note running all through this splendid life is a love for the truth and his devotion to the great church to which he belongs. No matter how alluring other things have been, he has never allowed them to conflict with or diminish his zeal for this work. From his early manhood, he has exhibited a quality of spiritual leadership of an uncommon kind. As a Sunday school teacher and superintendent, he built up an organization that was the pride of the ward in which he lived, and attracted the attention of Sunday school workers everywhere. Those who were associated with him in this work in the 17th Ward received an inspiration that has lasted them a lifetime. He was chosen an apostle October 6, 1903. He has always been one of the most ardent and devoted workers in the entire church. When his health would permit, he traveled an average of more than 30,000 miles a year, and held on an average 1 and 1.5 meetings per day. Physically, he is not robust and has often worked beyond the limits of his strength. Now, if he did that, he would have injured himself. Yes? Don't do that. In June 1919, he went with his family to preside over the European mission, the activities of which were greatly curtailed as a result of the World War. He remained until August 1921. Under his presidency, the mission was rehabilitated. The scattered saints were cheered and comforted by the entire work was quickened by his vitalizing touch. As president, he displayed that rare quality of leadership which inspired the missionaries to rise to their very best. He won the allegiance and loyalty of all the elders by his constant love and unfailing kindness. He could rise to great spiritual altitudes and speak with a lofty and convincing eloquence. At the same time, he never overlooked the minutest detail when it came to administering the affairs of the mission. Almost from the beginning of scouting in Utah, he has been officially and actively associated with this movement, both in local and national capacity. At the present time, he belongs to the National Council and is a member of the Executive Committee of Region 12. He took the initiative in the organization of the Utah Pioneer Trails and Landmarks Association and is its president. Both scouting and the preservation of our pioneer landmarks appeal to the very finest instincts of his soul, and both will profit greatly thereby. He will bring to these movements not only his splendid ability and a consecrated heart, but the general influence of his high office and the powerful support and cooperation of his numerous and influential friends. Under his tolerant and magnanimous leadership, no group or sect or detail will be overlooked or neglected. George Albert Smith descends from a line of men and women who belong to the nobility of the earth. The unselfish work which he has done and which he is now doing will secure for him a place among the nobility of God. All right. Heavy on character, low on facts. So a few things I do happen to know about him that were not mentioned is that he had a patriarchal blessing where it said that he would serve in the church just like his father and grandfather before him. Well, his father and grandfather were both apostles, so he was fairly certain he would be one at one point. And so he was never serious about finding a profession. He was like, who cares? Like, I'll do some work for a while and, it'll pay the bills. And I'm not looking to move the ranks and find a career. I'm just having a job that will pay the bills. Yeah. And so he would go to General Conference every year and just sit in the front row and wait for his name to be called. Until one year he didn't make it because he had promised his child to take them to the circus. And so they went on a Saturday, and it turned out he was called as an apostle that day. I like that story. I think it's funny. But also, he was a very funny person. He had a very, happy, laughing personality. And they didn't really mention that. He also, though, suffered from some ill health at one point. And so they did mention a couple times when his health permitted. And that's because he was very sick for, I think, a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. Yeah, he came pretty close to death, but he eventually made it through. I don't recall what he was sick with, so hopefully that will be in the Wikipedia article. But anyway, so that's a few things that they completely left out. Also, that he and Lucy, is it Lucy Woodruff or Emily? I'm bad with names, can you tell? Anyway, his wife. They grew up together. They were about the same age, and they went to school together. They were in the same class. They lived just down the street from each other. But they didn't get along, at all. They fought like cats and dogs until they were both adults. So I'm not quite sure what made the difference, but apparently George Albert Smith had a crush on her for a long time. And it wasn't until he came back from a mission, I believe, as an adult, that they finally got together. Before that, they never dated, they weren't friends. Yeah, so I feel like, that's one of those, I want to annoy somebody I like, it's a very childish thing to do. But he eventually grew out of that, thank goodness. But yeah, he suffered a lot from his poor eyesight, and I hate that they make this talk about it as if it were a positive. Very poor eyesight really kind of sucks. All right, let's go look up the Wikipedia article. All right, I'm also, I've gotten flack for using Wikipedia to fact check myself, so may I just say that Wikipedia is a second source. That is all. I just read one source. I'm looking at a second source. Should you use Wikipedia if you're writing like a book or something? Absolutely not. Go look it up. Like in real sources, look up the sources from Wikipedia. But is it a decent source to fact check yourself for a YouTube video? Sure. Then that's what we're here. All right. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's really long. But I will like to go through a few more facts than we had before. Also, a lot of his pictures were taken in profile, so you couldn't tell that his eyes didn't align, since he was slightly cross-eyed. He was self-conscious about it. So just in case you were wondering why there are so many side pictures of him, that's why. George Albert Smith Sr., since he has a son named George Albert Smith Jr., was an American religious leader who served as the 8th president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, they didn't get to that part because he wasn't the president of the church yet when the article was written. Early life. Born in Salt Lake City, Utah Territory, Smith was one of 19 children of Latter-day Saint apostle John Henry Smith. His mother, Sarah Farr, was the first of John Henry Smith's 2 wives, whom he had simultaneously for many years. His grandfather, for whom he was named, was also an LDS church apostle, as well as a cousin of church founder Joseph Smith. John Henry Smith and George Albert Smith are the only father and son pair to have been members of the Quorum of the 12 at the same time, having served in the Quorum together between 1903 and 1910. They definitely weren't the only father and son pair, though. In his youth, Smith worked at the Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution, ZCMI factory, and traveled throughout Utah as a salesman. Yeah, but in his young youth, 13? He shouldn't have had to work in a factory at 13. I'm sorry, that still annoys me. Smith attended high school at Brigham Young Academy, graduating in 1884. He then studied law at University of Deseret, later University of Utah, for a year, and failed out. His work as a salesman for ZCMI involved a long trip starting in Panaca, Nevada, and moving northeastward, with Smith taking grocery orders while his associate James Polton took shoe orders. Okay. Smith also gave many impromptu concerts on this sales trip, playing on harmonica and guitar with a Polton accompanying on flute. During this journey, Smith would regularly attend LDS church services on Sundays in the towns he passed through, coming north from Panaca. He would regularly be invited to give a talk while visiting. That's interesting. In 1894, after returning from serving in the church's Southern States mission, I was pretty sure he went on a mission, Smith got a job as assisting to a traveling salesman at ZCMI. See, he didn't care. He didn't care what he was doing. He just wanted to make some money. He excelled at this enough to be promoted to working in the packing box shop, where he again excelled and was promoted to wholesale grocery salesman for ZCMI's Salt Lake County operations. He also served as secretary of the Kanab Cattle Company and a member of the Utah National Guard. In 1896, he had joined the Republican Party and campaigned for William McKinley, who became President of the United States. He was later present at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo in 1901 and heard the shot that killed McKinley. He was assassinated, in case you didn't know that. He was appointed as a receiver for the land office in Utah in the years 1898 and 1903. While surveying for a railroad as a young man, Smith's eyesight was permanently impaired by the glare of the sun. Now, I don't know what causes this, but I'm sure that this is a thing. So I did hear that this was a thing. So if you know more about eyesight damage from the sun, please write it down below. Clearly, it can damage your eyes. Yeah. After 1903, Smith found his frequent travels debilitating and began to show prominent symptoms of physical weakness. He was eventually diagnosed with lupus. Oh, I didn't know he had lupus. Lupus erythematosus, a chronic debilitating autoimmune disease. Okay, yeah, that explains his poor health, yeah. From 1898 to 1902, Smith was chair of the Republican Committee for the 28th Voting District of Utah. In 1902, there were those who sought to convince Smith to run for the United States Senate. He instead deferred to allow Reed Smoot to be the Republican candidate. In 1920, while serving as president of the church's European mission, Smith toured England and Scotland as the ZCMI representative to the American Goods Association, tours sponsored by the British Chamber of Trade. Is that not a conflict of interest? Like, you're there as president of the European mission, and you're like, oh, while I'm here, I might as well, make some business contacts. Like, what? In 1921, Smith became a member of the Salt Lake City Chamber of Commerce. In 1923, he served on the reception committee for U.S. President Warren G. Harding's visit to Salt Lake City. Smith was known for his patriotism and joined various American patriotic groups. He was also an ardent supporter of the Boy Scouts of America. Okay, I'm going to skip down. Avid genealogist and family historian, and was named vice president of the Sons of American Revolution in 1922. In 1932, Smith found himself at odds with much of the ZCMI. Problems following the Great Depression. Yeah, starting in 1933, Smith was president of the Utah Society for the Sightless. He continued in this position until 1949. Under his leadership, the society built a new home for the blind in Salt Lake City. They also printed the first Braille edition of the Book of Mormon. Wow, his eyesight must have been very poor then. Like, if you are your eyesight is so poor that you consider yourself blind, like, I bet he was legally blind. That made him much more aware of the plight of the blind. Interesting. I did not know that. That was new. Marriage and family. On May 25th, 1892, Smith married Lucy Emily Woodruff. Oh, that's why I couldn't remember if it was Lucy or Emily. It's Lucy Emily. My bad. Okay. A granddaughter of Wilford Woodruff in the Manti Temple. The couple later had 3 children. It was several years after their marriage that their first daughter was born, with the pregnancy starting shortly after Woodruff gave Lucy a priesthood blessing to be a mother. So they struggled a little bit with infertility, yeah? Lucy had spent much of her time growing up in the household of her grandfather and looked on him almost more of a father than a grandfather. Smith's son, George Albert Smith Jr., became a professor at Harvard Business School. Now, they didn't mention that. Smith's daughter, Emily Stewart, served for a time on the Primary General Board. Louis B. Felt, the general superintendent of the primary, guided Stewart to take a hospital training course in Denver to expand her medical training. She already had as a registered nurse. She then became one of the leaders of the primary children's hospital in Salt Lake City. She and May Anderson disagreed on how to run the hospital, which led to her resignation from the primary general board in 1932. Ooh, that's the tea. Yeah? I have no idea who was right. Yeah? Smith's second daughter, Edith, earned a master's degree in history. For much of the 1930s, Smith was involved in protecting her husband, George Eliot, from charges of mail fraud connected with alleged fraudulent stock sales by the Salt Lake Mortuary in Montana. Smith's brother, Winslow Farr Smith, was also involved in these charges. Smith felt the charges were baseless charges developed by other morticians who resented the Salt Lake Mortuary's low prices. Did they, though, or was it real? Lucy served as president of the Relief Society in Europe, while Smith was the mission president. She was also a delegate to the World Council. She was a member of the YWMIA's General Board for 29 years. Lucy Smith died in 1937. Smith never remarried, which made him the only man to have not had a living wife while he was serving as church president, until Gordon B. Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson both served the later part of their presidencies while widowed. Really? Huh. I didn't know that. That was new. I did know that George Albert Smith was very devoted to his wife. He adored her. So I could picture him not wanting to remarry. That's interesting. Okay. We're going to skip down a little bit. Apostleship. So, Smith was called as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in 1903. In 1907, Smith negotiated the church's purchase of the Joseph Smith farm in Palmyra, New York. Oh, I heard about this. I understood that his wife sewed the money into her skirts to keep it safe because they didn't have much money and they could only afford a certain price. But they were very much afraid of losing anything of it, so that they couldn't purchase it. They really wanted to buy it. From 1920 until 1921, Smith served as president of the church's British and European missions. In this capacity, he preached in... Okay, they're going to list all the countries. That I don't think is that interesting, but okay. While presiding over the European mission, Smith had his first airplane flight as a part of a journey from Britain to Sweden. That's kind of cool. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, he was a strong supporter of the uses of airplanes in travel. J. Reuben Clark of the church's first presidency was an equally ardent opposer of the use of airplanes. Considering how many airplane crashes in these early years of aviation, Clark may have had more reasonable approach to the issue. Okay. Okay, it's not wrong. They're not wrong. But he thought that was cool, yeah? It is cool, yeah? Planes are cool. From 1922 to 1935, Smith was the general superintendent of the church's MIA. His counselors were Richard R. Lyman and Melvin J. Ballard. During his tenure, cooperation between the young men and young women MIA organizations increased. One sign of this was the Young Women's Journal merging into the Young Women's MIA published Improvement Era in 1929. In 1935, he was succeeded in this position by Albert E. Bowen. His illnesses, seem to have come on in a large part as a result of the many difficult circumstances he suffered while visiting state conferences during the first 6 years he was an apostle. Was it though, or was it just lupus related? Or combination of the two? Just asking. After his return from Europe in 1921, Smith had a full schedule of state conference assignments. That year he presided at state conferences in Utah, Arizona, and Chihuahua State in Mexico. In 1921, Smith became the chairman of the executive board of the Deseret News. He was also on the general board for religion classes, which were weekday religious instruction that later emerged, blah, blah, blah. Purchased the Hill Cumorah for the church. They organized the Utah Pioneer Trails and Landmarks Association. With the death of Rutger Clausen in 1943, Smith was sustained as president of the Quorum of the 12. With the death of Heber J. Grant, Smith became president of the church on May 21, 1945. When World War II ended, Smith helped send supplies to Europe and was also known for his efforts to revitalize missionary work. He publicly denounced the activities and political influence of the American Ku Klux Klan. Good for him. Smith dedicated the Idaho Falls Temple in 1945. Over his lifetime, he traveled approximately 1 million miles fulfilling church assignments. Yeah. There's a lot of movement involved, yeah. Smith was the first church president to visit Mexico while in office. He went there to complete the reconciliation of and returned to the church of a group of apostates in Mexico, known as the Third Conventionists. Also during his presidency, the first translation of the endowment ceremony was done. Well, that's cool. The translation was done by Antoine R. Ivans and Eduardo Balderas with the approval of the First Presidency. Into Spanish, I'm guessing. Emotional illness. While not common knowledge among contemporary members of the LDS Church or even in Smith's day, it is well known to his close friends, church associates, and family members that Smith suffered from chronic depression and anxiety, which at times could be debilitating, including one nervous breakdown that left him largely bedridden from 1909 to 1912. That's the one I was thinking of. Because he was quite ill in that time. I mean, ill in the sense of, not well, but, I guess physically he was okay, but, yeah, that's rough. Throughout his life, Smith took to his bed sometimes for days at a time with emotional and mental illness-related issues. I had heard that, yeah. Smith professed that these experiences helped deepen his understanding of the gospel and personal belief in the existence of God, stating in a 1921 General Conference session, "I have been in the valley of the shadow of death in recent years, so near the other side that I am sure that for the special blessing of our Heavenly Father I could not have remained there. The nearer I went to the other side, the greater was my assurance that the gospel is true." I feel like this is very relatable, yeah? Like, listen to this one. I wasn't going to read it, but I was skimming it a little bit, and it sounds interesting now. According to Mary Jane Woodger, those close to George Albert Smith were aware of some emotional problems. Grandchild George Albert Smith V suggests that his grandfather struggled with depression, feeling incompetent, and being overwhelmed. There were times when he could just not pull it all together. Another granddaughter, Shauna Lucy Stewart Larson, who lived in George Albert's home for 12 years as a child, remembers that when there was great, tremendous stress, mostly of an emotional kind, it took its toll, and he would literally have to go to bed for several days. Grandson Robert Murray Stewart remembers there were problems associated with his mental health, just maintaining control of himself. Given what seems to be George Albert's emotional fragility, physical illness may have been a socially acceptable way for him to retreat, rest, and regroup before tackling his responsibilities again with renewed determination. Yeah. The thing I wanted to read about that was feeling incompetent and overwhelmed. He was an apostle and then later president of the church. Think about that. We sometimes hold them up on a pedestal and think that they're so much better than us, but they suffer from imposter syndrome too. You know, you might feel that you yourself are not competent and you're not possible to do something, and you know, maybe you're a fraud, maybe you shouldn't be saying things that you're saying. But to be honest, this is kind of a general human experience. Everyone feels that, or not almost everyone. And I think that the way we handle it is the question. He suffered a lot with it, and he took days off and just rested before he's able to get up and keep going. And I can't even imagine how bad that must have been. Like, I have had depression, but not debilitating. I'm very high functioning, but I couldn't imagine having it be that bad that you couldn't even get out of bed. That seems really sad to me, especially someone who is clearly a very good person and wants to do good to the whole world, but just doesn't have the strength and so feels inadequate. Like, I feel like that's kind of where that went, you know, and I have to say that that is really touching to me. Death and legacy. In March 1951, Smith suffered a stroke that left him mostly paralyzed on the right side of his body and gradually deteriorated until his death on April 4th, 1951, his 81st birthday. I did know that he died on his birthday. He was buried at Salt Lake City Cemetery. Okay, and they're showing kind of the, like, ancestry back. Yeah, so John Smith was the brother of Joseph Smith Sr., and then George A. Smith was the first cousin of Joseph Smith Jr. John Henry Smith was then the second cousin of Joseph F. Smith, and then George Albert Smith was the third cousin of Joseph Fielding Smith. I gotta get it right. Anyways, that's how that works. So, I think that's really interesting, and I think that George Albert Smith was such a good person in general. I feel like, you know, compared to the last one we read, where we had some not so nice ideas, but I feel like the article itself we read was a little, like almost sweeping some things under the rug, like just saying, you know, when his health permits, and not mentioning that he suffers from debilitating clinical depression as well as lupus. You know, like, those are kind of relevant. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying. And also his strabismus and like very, very poor eyesight, to the point where he was legally blind. Like, I feel like those are things that are important to know. He was disabled and suffered from chronic illness, as well as mental health issues. So I feel like that isn't emphasized enough, because the fact that he just got up every day and kept going, I find admirable. I wouldn't say that, going the direction of like, oh, they're so inspiring. What I'm saying is that those are the kind of real heroes we have in this world, are the people who get up every day, even though they're so depressed they can barely get out of bed. That is admirable. That is strength. And anyone who feels like they're an imposter because they're not as happy as other people, like, you should never feel that way. You're doing your best. Keep going. Keep getting out of bed. You're a hero for this. And I think that everybody should know that about themselves and about others. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of up on my high horse there, but that is my personal opinion. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. That was really interesting to me, and I hope that you learned something as well. So if you did, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.